Okay. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the launch of Child Rehabilitation from the Holocaust to October 7th, edited by Dr. Boaz Cohen and Dr. Verena Buser. And this remarkable volume brings together historians, educators, medical professionals, and practitioners from several countries around a shared question: what can we learn from the rehabilitation of child survivors after the Holocaust to help children affected by war and mass violence today? By connecting historical scholarship with contemporary experience, this book demonstrates how lessons from the past can inform the care and rehabilitation of children in the present. It is my privilege to moderate this evening, but before we begin tonight's presentations, I'd like to introduce the two editors whose vision and dedication made this important volume possible. Our first one is Dr. Verena Buser. Dr. Buser is an associate scholar at the Holocaust Studies program of Western Galilee College and a research advisor to the Commissioner of Combating Antisemitism in the state of Brandenburg in Germany. Her research focuses on children and youth during and after the Holocaust, and more recently on the genocide accusation against Israel. Together with Dr. Boaz Cohen, she developed the international project Children After War, Holocaust and Genocide, which serves as the intellectual foundation for this important volume. Verena, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay, so Yaron, thank you very much for the short notice taking over of being our moderator today, because Barnabas unfortunately couldn't also not join us because Efrat, there was something going on and she also cannot join us today, unfortunately. But nevertheless, I would like to welcome you today. Good evening from Berlin, or good morning, wherever you are in the world now. And I would like to say in not more than 5 minutes, maybe it's now 6, because we have a little bit more time now, how the book came into life. So I have to say, Boaz came up with the idea bringing past and present together during a conference in 2016 at the Dachau Memorial Site. And he and we developed the idea together against the background of the refugee, it's called crisis, but the influx of refugees, specifically unaccompanied minors, arriving in Europe from the years 2014, 2015 and onwards. We are both, as all of you know, historians researching the experiences of children during and after the Holocaust. Boaz focuses, among other things, on the testimonies of Jewish child survivors, while my research centers on children and teenagers in Nazi concentration camps. We noticed back then, at the time in 2016, but also already in 2015, projects aimed at addressing the needs of children and teenagers who had survived flight, war, and genocides were being literally hastily improvised and launched. We were and remain convinced that, as historians, we could contribute something valuable to this effort. Thus, since 2017, we are bringing together historians and practitioners within our Children of War, Holocaust and Genocide project in interdisciplinary workshops under the title Children in Crisis. And just this year in Potsdam, we had our 10th workshop on this. We are committed to making the historical knowledge, as Yaron mentioned earlier, of child rehabilitation available for today's world and provide insights into the way the provision of help and support for children and teens as victims in the post-war from then was negotiated. The historical sources show the approaches to building safe spaces in the past, which included helping children to regain trust, providing housing, education, integration, inclusion, and cultural and religious aspects. So Why did we choose exactly this title, Child Rehabilitation from the Holocaust to 7th of October, with chapters on the Ukraine, for example, like Nehamas or Imkes and Tetyanas? The Islamist massacres as of October 7th brought a new urgency to the questions of the fate of the children as targets of genocide, Jewish children, of course. They were being killed because they were Jewish. Following the terrorist attacks by Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and their collaborators on innocent civilians, we saw ourselves literally forced as experts on violence against children to call these actions by name. Following the immediate days after the massacres, we published a piece in German and English under the title "The Nazis Are Back." Why? We as Holocaust scholars thought we owe it not only to Holocaust survivors to speak out. We owed it also to the victims of the new Nazis. This is what we said back then. Hamas and its collaborators kidnapped Jewish children and elderly to Gaza. They conducted manhunts and executed civilians. Today, the world is full of Hamas and its supporters. But since we published this article, it became clear that while there is indeed a direct continuity between Nazi anti-Semitism and that of Hamas and its allies, there was one crucial difference. The Nazi perpetrators tried to hide their genocidal killings. At the war's end, they built special units to hide their crimes. It was, for example, the so-called Action 1005 under the command of SS officer Paul Blobel, in which the concealment of mass graves through the exhumation and cremation of bodies was orchestrated, beginning in 1942. Contrary to this, Hamas and its collaborators proudly promoted their genocidal crimes through social media. Sometimes they even posted them in real time through the devices of the victims. It was clear that the perpetrators strategically targeted Israeli children and their families, which led Israeli scholars like Kohav to the determination of the new legal term genocide. Everywhere in the Gaza border communities where children and young people lived, they were murdered, burned, and mutilated. One example, the body of 12-year-old Liel Hetzroni, to whom this book is dedicated, was burned so badly that it took more than 6 weeks to identify her remains. The survivors of that day witnessed inconceivable crimes, their mothers and fathers being murdered. They saw their parents trying, in many cases unsuccessfully, to protect their children. More than 35 Israeli children were abducted to Gaza. They were branded victims of child sexual abuse every day, lived in fear of death, were forcibly separated from their relatives. Brothers Kvir and Ariel Bibas, who were forcibly also abducted with their mother Shiri from Kibbutz Nir Oz, and later were strangulated to death by the Mujahideen brigades. So, one important thing to note is when we speak about Hamas and rehabilitating children, that always we were asked the question, what about, why don't you have a chapter on the children in Gaza? And I would like to emphasize the following. One important thing to note is that while editing this book, we approached authors to write chapters on children in Gaza or Syrian refugee children in Lebanon or Turkey. However, we had the experience repeatedly over the last few years, and not only during the editing of this book, that we were always rejected. Why? A quote from someone who works with children in who worked with children in Turkey in 2003 can demonstrate why, and I quote him. I really believe that some people are reluctant to contact you because of the sensitivity of working with an Israeli-affiliated body. Even if they have no objection to it, they might be afraid due to the political conflict and being still in the region, end quote. A pity. So I come to a close now. I had spoke already 8 minutes. Last but certainly not least, I would like to express my and our deepest gratitude to Dr. Julia Brauch and Verena Deutsch from the Gruyter, who accompanied our work for over a year. I would also like to thank two of our closest friends, Dr. Olaf Glöckner from the Moses Mendelssohn Center in Potsdam and Professor Dr. Stefan Thomas from the Potsdam University of Applied Sciences, who hosted our annual workshops in Potsdam repeatedly.
Our other editor for this special volume is Dr. Boaz Cohen. Dr. Cohen is the founder and director of the Holocaust Studies program at Western Galilee College and an associate researcher at the Center for Collective Violence, Holocaust and Genocide Studies at University College London. He is one of the leading scholars in the field of Holocaust aftermath studies, whose pioneering research on child survivors of the Holocaust and their post-war testimonies has significantly shaped the field. Together with Dr. Verena Buser, he founded the international project Children After War, Holocaust Genocide, which has brought together historians and practitioners for almost a decade and ultimately gave birth to this important book.
I join all the thanks that were said here. When we started off with the idea that historians can help do something for children today, we had several colleagues with us. They disappeared on the way. They did not believe in this. And this is okay. Like, who are you historians of 1945? What can you do to help children today, considering that there have been several decades of work by aid workers and history of aid to children? I mean, with all due respect, you don't have much to add. Now, what we feel all the time is that there is a very strong divide indeed between historians and practitioners. You see in Israel after October 7, people working with children writing all the time about the fact that there is no academic research on this. But actually there is academic research, not only by us too, but there's academic research on rehabilitation of children after the war, experience of children after the war. It seems that we have a problem striking up a dialogue between practitioners and historians. And this is a challenge we have not yet solved. But I think it's this book is going some way in order to do something for this. Because we now have a book that has practitioners and historians in the same book, and it's also open access, which we worked very hard to do, so that people from all disciplines, even people not in universities, will be able, not in university libraries, will be able to read it, and maybe we will be able to build this bridge between historians and the practitioners. By the way, after our last workshop, and I didn't tell you this, we had a researcher from criminal science from Western Galilee who spoke in the last workshop about work being done with children at risk in closed institutions in the war zone in the north. And they developed all sorts of stuff, and we talked a lot, and we talked about the fact that this is not the first time that children are after wars. This has happened before, and there is knowledge which we should find a way to bring out. And now she is organizing a nationwide project on children after the war in Israel, children at risk, child delinquency, etc., etc. And she convinced the organizers to have historians inside. She said, I learned that historians can tell us about what is happening before. I would like to add another point here about the book. My feeling throughout the years is that there is not much research on Israeli children in distress. I mean, there is research done in social work and there is research done in education, but generally, when you look at the world map of children in the Middle East who are being written about and researched, Israeli children are not exactly the first group looked at. Until October 7, we talked about children all over the world. Unfortunately, because of October 7, we felt a very strong need to talk about Israeli children. And we've done several events online talking about Israeli children. We think you can't get a full picture without researching, if we talk about Israel, children affected by the war, by loss of family, by stress, by evacuation. We are talking about tens of thousands of evacuated children, all sorts of stories which have not been researched, and we feel that they should be a part of the academic discipline. Thanks to, I think we started talking with Julia about this exactly 2 years ago in the BAIJS conference in Bristol. It took us 2 years to work this out, but I think this has resulted in an amazing volume. And even having this volume with this name on the shelf, or on the virtual shelf, is by itself a great step forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Boaz and Verena, for this wonderful introduction. This evening's program features 4 distinguished speakers whose chapters illustrate different dimensions of child rehabilitation after war, the Holocaust, and contemporary armed conflict. But we'll take the opportunity now to move to our next speaker. Unfortunately, Efrat Bona-Lev could not make it. Apparently there's an emergency in the Schneider Medical Center, so she might join us later. But so we'll move with the next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Martijn Lak, which is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Amsterdam and a lecturer in political history at Radboud University in Nijmegen. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Slavic Military Studies. His research focuses on the Second World War military history, Dutch-German relations, and more recently, the history of Jewish orphans and the aftermath of the Holocaust. In his chapter, Dr. Lak examines the fate of Jewish war orphans in the Netherlands after the Holocaust, exploring the moral, political, and religious dilemmas surrounding their care and rehabilitation. His work reminds us that rebuilding children's lives required not only compassion, but also difficult decisions about identity, belonging, and the future. His lecture today is titled A Weighty and Pressing Affair, The Care for Jewish Orphans in the Netherlands, 1945 to 1950s. Martin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yaron, for the kind introduction. Just a small correction. I no longer work in Amsterdam, but I work in Rotterdam. So this can be a touchy affair in the Netherlands. Speaking of Rotterdam or Amsterdam, but let's leave football out of the picture for today. So good afternoon to all of you, or good morning, or good night already from the Netherlands. Let me share my presentation. I've made a short one. Let's see how we do that. Where can we find a presentation in this? Well, I can also do it without the presentation, if that's fine by all of you. Is that okay?
Share?
Yeah, but if I click on share, then there is no presentation being active. So that's strange.
You can send it to me and I open it for you.
You can open it on your computer and then try to share.
Does it work now?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm now sharing it, right?
You are sharing.
Yes.
Okay.
You're
All right,
sharing.
good. So Yaron already told me that, already told you that this is the title of my presentation. It's actually the title of the book chapter I wrote. Also, thank you very much, by the way, for having me in this meeting. I only have 5 to 7 minutes, so I'll try to keep it short, but I would like to start with this picture. It may be a familiar picture to some of you, but this is a picture of a school for Jewish kids, as you see in the Netherlands, in a small village or town or city, however you want to call it, of Deventer in 1942-1943. And the remarkable element of this picture is that, well, first of all, almost all of these kids were murdered. The only survivor is precisely in the middle, wearing the white dress. This is Felicia Polak, and she's the only one of her classmates who survived the Second World War by going into hiding. Now, as you may know, in the Netherlands has the highest number of murdered Jews in Western Europe, around 70%, which is far higher than France and Belgium, for example, for all sorts of reasons that would lead too far to discuss them here. But the figure is enormous. So over 100,000 Dutch Jews were murdered, many children among them. So we know from figures or from dates that between 4,000 and 6,000 Dutch Jewish children actually survived the Second World War, most of them by going into hiding. And they went into hiding with non-Jewish families, and that's important for the rest of the story. Now, we know from research that around half of these thousands of children could return at least to one parent. So one of their parents survived. So in that sense, they weren't orphans. However, over 2,000 Jewish children had lost both parents during the Shoah. Now, already during the Second World War, there was a fierce debate on the question as to what to do with them. Can we still consider these children to be Jewish? They had been in hiding with non-Jewish families for years, which, for example, led sometimes to forced conversion, or they were so young that they had no idea that they had Jewish parents, only coming to that realization decades after the Second World War. This actually happened often because the foster parents, especially if they were non-Jewish, often didn't tell them about their history only when they turned 18, for example. So there was a fierce public debate. So this battle was actually fought in the media to some extent, and there were basically two main parties to that battle, and that was the former Dutch resistance of the Second World War, the Dutch government, and non-Jewish parents who had hidden children on the one hand, and they were mostly of the opinion that the Jewish children should stay with their hiding parents or should be taken care of by the Dutch government in non-Jewish institutions. So this is one party to the equation. Now, the Jewish community, on the other hand, insisted that those children that still lived should return basically to the Jewish community, so strongly decimated after the Second World War. There was a problem here, however. So how could you determine whether or not someone was, for example, Orthodox, had an Orthodox upbringing? How to determine that? How do you do that if there is no relatives left? So this led to, well, as I said, to fierce public battles about the custody. So who was responsible for these kids? What was better for them? Was it better to stay with their former hiding parents, or was it better to return to a Jewish environment with someone they may not even know, and that could lead to all sorts of problems. Now, these two sides in this quarrel were, black and whitely speaking, the so-called Commissie voor Oorlogspleegkinderen, or in Dutch OPK, which had a Jewish representation, but they were a minority. And on the other hand, Le'ezrat Hayelet, which means something like to the aid of the child, that wanted to make sure that Jewish children returned to a Jewish environment. Now, the problem with this Jewish community was that there was a strong difference internally as to this question. So those who were of a more Zionist approach or were Zionists were of the opinion there is no future in the Netherlands. Look what the Dutch government has basically done. Well, nothing actually. So there's no future for us in the Netherlands. So that means that all these Jewish children that have survived should go to Aliyah, to Israel. Now, there were also other elements in the Jewish community who said, well, no, the Netherlands is our place to stay. So we need to stay here, but the Jewish children need to come to our custody again. Now, for this chapter, that's only 10 pages long, so it's not that extensive in that sense. I used, of course, secondary literature, but also the primary sources from the Dutch Institute for War Documentation and archives from Jewish social work in Amsterdam, or in Dutch, that is JMW. Now, one of my conclusions, or perhaps one of the most striking conclusions, is that the kids themselves were hardly asked what they wanted. So they were never asked the question, do you want to stay with your foster parent, or do you want to return to your surviving uncle or a further distant relative? So you could basically claim that these children had no what we call child agency. Now, and then you can say, well, that is strange. Why don't you ask children? But you should position that in the aftermath of the Second World War, when the Dutch society was still very paternalistic and very hierarchical, and children were basically not asked whether or not they wanted something. So if you check out, if you study the primary sources, you see that elderly people are speaking about children over people, but not with children, but not with them. At the same time, you could, of course, claim that children always have agency. Acting like an obnoxious kid can also be a sort of agency. It is a way of showing that you do not agree with something. But I think that if you want to learn lessons, that this must be much more dominant when dealing with war orphans, be they Jewish, be they Palestinian, be they Sudanese, be they Ukrainian, be they Russian, doesn't matter. Try to listen to the children. They often know what to say and what they want. Of course, there were also many children in the Netherlands in the immediate period after the war that were only like 2 to 3 years old, and that made the discussion even more difficult. Now, another thing I want to point out before I give back the floor to Yaron is that for a very long time after the Second World War, there was very little attention to the faith of Dutch Jewish orphans. And we can discuss that a bit more elaborately later on. But that probably had to do with the fact that Dutch Jewish children ranked very lowly on the so-called hierarchy of suffering in the Netherlands after the Second World War. They survived, so what was there to complain about, in black and white words? And so only in the early 1990s was there much more attention for the faith of Dutch Jewish Holocaust survivors, but also to Jewish children surviving the Holocaust in more general terms. I think I want to leave it with that. Is that okay? Did I use enough time? Okay.
Yeah, that's
Thanks for your
fine.
attention.
Thank you. We'll do more during the discussion later on. So thank you very much, Dr. Lak. And I want to move to our next speaker now, which is my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Daniela Ozaki-Stern. And Daniela is a Holocaust scholar and lecturer at Western Galilee College. Research focuses on Jewish resistance during the Holocaust, Holocaust documentation, and modern Jewish history. She previously served as director of the Moreshet Holocaust Archive and currently serves as book review editor of the journal Jewish Culture and History. Her contribution to this volume takes us to the British detention camps in Cyprus after the Holocaust, where thousands of young Holocaust survivors awaited their journey to the future state of Israel. She demonstrates how education, art, and creativity became powerful instruments in restoring hope, dignity, and childhood after a catastrophe. Her lecture this evening is titled Education, Art, and Rehabilitation of Jewish Children and Youth in the Cyprus Detention Camps, 1946 to 1949. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniela Ozaki-Stern. Daniela, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, Yaron, and I want to thank Verena and Boaz for editing such an important volume, and I see so many friends here in the audience, which is great. So I just want to share my presentation. 1 minute. Okay. Can you see it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So my chapter in the volume deals with the British detention camps in Cyprus between 1946 and 1949. Following the horrors of the Holocaust, 52,000 Jewish survivors were forcibly diverted on the way to Eretz Israel. Among them were 10,000 children and teenagers, a vast number of whom were orphans. Imagine the profound psychological blow these young people experienced. Having just survived the Nazi machinery of annihilation, they found themselves once again surrounded by barbed wire fences, armed guards, and watchtowers. The physical space itself triggered severe past traumas. However, what unfolded within this difficult space was not a collapse into despair, but an extraordinary effort toward human and psychological rehabilitation. The modern framework of trauma therapy and clinical art therapy did not exist yet as we know them today. The teachers and instructors who arrived to Cyprus to help were mostly young adults in their 20s, some of whom were Holocaust survivors themselves. They had no formal psychological training. Instead, their approach to rehabilitation was intuitive and future-oriented. The prevailing educational philosophy was not to dwell on the horrific wounds of the past, but rather to repress them in favor of constructing an optimistic, vibrant picture of the future. Healing was designed to come from action, community, and national purpose. The goal was simple but profound: to transform deeply traumatized, isolated orphans into independent, cooperative, and productive citizens ready to build a new society and a new country. The crown jewel of this rehabilitative effort was the establishment of the youth village in Camp 65 in January 1947. At its peak, the village housed over 2,100 children, making it larger than any residential youth institution in Israel or Europe at the time. How did the youth village facilitate rehabilitation? The architecture of daily life was deliberately structured to restore a sense of agency to children who had been treated as objects of destruction for years. The trainees went to school to learn Hebrew and Jewish history, but they also worked 3 hours a day. They ran the kitchen, did the laundry, maintained basic hygiene, and managed workshops for carpentry, shoemaking, tailoring, and gardening. This structured routine was therapeutic in its predictability. By working together, these children built a democratic micro-society. The group itself became a unifying restorative force. As psychological studies conducted in the camps in 1947 by American and Israeli teams later revealed, out of the thousands of children who passed through the village, remarkably few exhibited severe behavioral problems. Rehabilitation requires safe attachment figures. In Cyprus, these figures were the educators and instructors. Because they lived with the children day and night, they became substitute parents. Dr. Paul Friedman, a prominent American psychologist who led a research team to the camps, observed these young educators with fascination. I talk about it in the chapter. He noted that despite their lack of professional clinical skills, they possessed immense empathy and emotional stability. They used their natural instincts to channel the children's aggression, grief, and anxiety into constructive, structured activities. Perhaps the most striking dimension of the rehabilitation process in Cyprus was the widespread implementation of arts, crafts, and creative workshops. In a setting with almost no materials around, art required total improvisation. Adult artists among the refugees, alongside emissaries from Eretz Israel with artistic backgrounds, established the workshops. In retrospect, the creative process proved to have an undeniable healing power. Art allowed traumatized children to express internal realities that language could not yet capture. And just to sum up, the story of the Cyprus detention camps is a testament to the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit and the innovative power of instinctive education. Through the collective structure of the youth village, the stabilizing presence of dedicated educators, and the restorative channel of artistic creation, these 10,000 children underwent a profound transformation. The historical lessons of Cyprus offer valuable insights for contemporary therapeutic and educational practices dealing with displaced and traumatized youth worldwide. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for this wonderful contribution. And we'll open the floor later for the discussion. So I would like to welcome now.
We have another speaker.
Yeah. I would like to welcome now our next speaker, which is Nechama Gruyter, a PhD researcher at Brunel University, London. Her research focuses on art psychotherapy with refugee and asylum-seeking children and their parents. She has many years of practical experience working with refugee families in Germany and currently serves as a consultant in mental health and psychological support for organizations working with refugees. In her chapter, she presents an inspiring study of art therapy workshops with Ukrainian refugees, mothers, children, demonstrating how creative expression can foster resilience, rebuild trust, and strengthen family relationships after trauma. Her work beautifully illustrates one of the central messages of this volume, that meaningful rehabilitation requires not only professional expertise, but also creativity, empathy, and hope. Nechama Gruyter, today's lecture is titled Co-Creating Safe Spaces Through Art. What can we learn from parent-child workshops with Ukrainian refugee mothers and their children in Berlin? So please join me in welcoming Nechama Brandman-Bauch. Nechama, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. I'll try to share myself as well. Give me just one moment, please. Hopefully, I hope you see this. So I'll also thank everyone, Boaz, Verena, and Martijn, and Daniela, who I've had the pleasure of spending time with and hearing their lectures in previous conferences. Yeah, I have to say from my side, it wasn't hard. I think it was 2020 or 2021 when I first participated in an online conference, and it was not very hard to convince me of the connection. I find it very relevant. I find it relevant from the perspective of the practitioner. So I came into it from the other side. Not that I don't know anything about history, but I'm not a historian. I'm busy with the practice. So I think Martijn and Daniela did a bit of the work for me in terms of convincing you of the links to the history and the importance of the arts. I think today, or I found, similar to what Boaz said, that I lived in Berlin since 2014. I studied art therapy in Israel and Haifa, and when I came, I didn't know that there would be an influx of refugees, but there I was in Berlin, already working with migrant children in Neukölln, and I found myself working with NGOs with refugees. And I found that as I was doing a mix of research and practice, where research related to practice, not history, that there was a kind of lack of looking into the past, into what was done in the past. And I was very much looking into it because I felt like this can't possibly be new. There are other people that had to deal with it. So I wrote also in the chapter about how there is a long history, also in the way that Daniela presented, to the predecessors of art therapy. Art therapy sort of classically starts, its history starts in around World War II, after World War II. But there was a lot of art created during and after the Holocaust, as you just saw, not only with children, but also, and there is a lot for us art therapists to learn about, to learn from. I'll mention, I didn't write her name in the slides, but I'll mention Elizabeth Lavick, who's in the US, because she also wrote a book about art in the Holocaust. And I mention her in the book chapter because she speaks about adults as well, but I think it's very, very important to understand the extent to which art was used for healing throughout, even in World War I. I even mentioned World War I there. Moving forward, we tend to forget because so many things happen in the world, but former Yugoslavia also taught us a lot about war and art therapy. Two of the researchers who wrote about it quite extensively are Deborah Kamlanovich and Bobby Lloyd, where they conceptualize this idea of there not needing necessarily a physical place, but that the presence of the therapist in the creative process creates an inhabited studio. Importantly, I'm going to jump. I'm not going to mention everything because I really only have a few minutes, but important to say, I think Martijn and Daniela were talking a lot about not only, but also about orphans. And nowadays, as I work with refugees, these were very important. However, many of the children come with parents, at least with one parent or with two parents. I've worked in the past with Syrians and Iranians and Afghanis and all kinds of backgrounds. Ukrainians, the Ukrainian mothers who you see the images that Ukrainian mothers and children created in the workshops in my research, they were all mothers because, as you might know, mostly at least at the beginning 22. I'm getting disoriented about the timeline now, but it was really primarily Ukrainian mothers and children that came. The men had to stay behind, which meant that there were parents, but they were primarily single mothering, often not in the sense that there wasn't a father, but the father was far away and there was a lot of fear about the father. So again, Daniela, you did my job perfectly in showing how nonverbal, body-based, arts-based activity is so important in healing and helpful, especially for children who have experienced war and who are displaced. Adding to that community is essential, and the mentioning of attachment is so essential here as well. But here, rather than talking about the team, I'm back to talking about the parents when they are present and the importance of engaging them. And I'll link back to what Martijn said about agency. I think agency is key and important. And for lack of time, what I will say is that in my practice, I found that I tried to as much as I could to engage parents in the art therapy that I did in Berlin with refugees, but it was hard in various ways. There were many barriers, language barriers, time schedules, all kinds of issues that made it really difficult to kind of reach the parents, which creates a bit of a cycle, right? Where we know research-wise, we know in theory how important parents, how important attachment figures are for children, especially children going through adversity. We know there are many barriers, like I mentioned, language barriers, cultural barriers, also just stress. The parents are overstressed and overwhelmed and not necessarily mentally available to do art therapy with their children. And it's very easy to go down the slippery slope of saying, oh, well, it's very hard, so never mind, we'll leave the parents out. But it's really important to keep them engaged. And that was kind of the focus of my research. And my research encompassed a lot, which I don't even get into in the chapter, neither in the next minute or two that I'm going to speak. But what I did was I had focus groups with art therapists working with refugees to ask them about work with parents. Then I had focus groups with parents. In this case, these were Syrian, Sudanese, and Afghani parents whose children experienced art therapy. And the last part is what I talk about in my chapter, which is workshops, parent-child workshops that I created that I facilitated with Ukrainian mothers and children. And there were 3 different workshops. One was a parent-child art making together. The second involved the mothers on their own, in kind of a support group using art as well. What you see here on the top is you see a joint painting in the making. This is the joint painting procedure, originally conceptualized by Tami Gavron from Haifa University. The second image here is an image that a mother created about her wish for a child, where she talked about them having a beautiful home with a garden in Ukraine and how they have to start again and try to rebuild this space, safe space for the child. The third workshop involved the mothers and the children all as a group online together, where they also shared separately, mother and child shared artwork together. So you will see in the chapter, there's a lot to learn. What I can say is rolling back to the topic of agency, that the mothers and the children, the Ukrainian mothers and children, especially appreciated the mother-child or parent-child artwork together. And there's something in it that gave agency to both mother and child, because it's a structured exercise where they each create separately in their own space, and then they have a chance to create also together on the paper. And there's a set of rules about not drawing on top of each other's spaces, which gives them the option to each have their separate space and then connect it together. And it gives the chance for the child to express their own emotions, to express what's going on with them, and the mother to express, or the parent, but in this case, the mothers, to express their own story, what's happening, and then to connect it. And it allowed for them to have their own process, even without there being a therapist necessarily talking to them about every aspect about it or analyzing it, which gave agency to the child, agency to the parent, and agency to them together as a dyad to also feel like they're going through this observational process together. And I'm just gonna ask because do I have another minute or two?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it was 2 years ago, or a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, must have been 2 years ago, where I presented at the conference in Potsdam. And there, I think it was the first time that I did this mix of sharing a personal work of art of mine. I don't know if Verena and Boaz, you were aware of that, but it's not that I usually share personal artwork, but it was short. It wasn't long after the 7th of October. And so I felt the need to share something of my own. And now is the second time where I'm going to mix it and show my artwork because of the book cover. So I'm just going to say, to give you a bit of a little story in time, that these workshops, the first parent-child workshop actually took place on the 13th of October 2023. So I didn't expect it, but my mindset was a little different. I had planned the workshops, everything was set in place, and then less than a week after the 7th of October, I found myself slightly in a different position than I thought, a little identifying even more than I thought with the mothers and children, some of which just came out of Ukraine and had loved ones in Ukraine and were often kind of connected to the news, listening to what's happening and worried. And I was also a mother of an 8-month-old, mentioning Shiri, Ariel, and Kfir Bibas, so exactly a month younger than Kfir Bibas. And I think I'm not the only mother with babies that age that really kind of froze in time in that second. From the moment that I saw an image of Shiri Bibas, it created a fear that is hard to describe when you feel like your own baby is the target. And so I drew an image of myself, which I really did spend a lot of time just hugging my baby. But the image was also a reminder of the image that I drew of my first child, which was in 2014. So in 2014, my eldest was 3, and we had moved to Germany for my husband's studies. And summer 2014 was a war. There was a war in Israel, and there were rockets. And I'm actually sitting in the same place where I drew it because I'm at my in-laws. And this is where I just automatically kind of felt the need to express and to draw something about protecting my son after our flight was actually canceled at the time because of rockets on the shooting to the airport. So we flew a week later, and now it's happened several times, but then it was the first time that rockets were shot at Ben Gurion Airport. So this was a new thing. And that was one of the things, sitting in the airplane with my son, moving countries and a war going on and rockets. That's what propelled me to sit and create that work of art while I was finishing my master's papers as well. And that is the artwork that I shared. I think it was 2 years ago in the conference, right? I'm losing sense of time a bit.
2 years ago, right after
was it
October
3?
7, February
24.
So it must have been so close to the 7th of October that I was still in this kind of mode of like, okay, 7th of October. And that rolled into the image being the cover of the book. And I think it's actually, it kind of pulls a thread in time in different points in time. Different mothers, connecting me also to the Ukrainian mothers I worked with. This basic instinct of wanting to protect children, needing to protect children, whether it's a biological parent or another attachment figure. It's a basic instinct that I hope we can manage to, as much as possible, protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nechama, for this unique dimension to this volume and the scholarship. Before we move to the discussion, I would like to say a few words about our final speaker that unfortunately could not make it. But since her chapter is mesmerizing in a way and gave me chills, so I'd like to say a few words about her. Dr. Efrat Bona-Lev is the CEO of Schneider Children's Medical Center, which is Israel's leading pediatric hospital, a specialist in pediatrics, pediatric intensive care, and medical administration. She graduated from Ben-Gurion University and holds a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University. Under her leadership, Schneider has placed a strong emphasis on research innovation and establishing Israel's first dedicated pediatric innovation and research center. Following the Hamas attacks on October 7th, Dr. Bona-Lev initiated the establishment of the Returnees Department, which cared for most of the children released from Hamas captivity in November 2023. Faced with an unprecedented medical challenge and virtually no existing literature, her team developed new treatment protocols that are helping shape the medical knowledge on caring for children returning from captivity. In her chapter in this volume, Dr. Bona-Lev offers a unique firsthand perspective on the medical, psychological, and emotional care provided to Israeli children returning from Hamas captivity, and she reminds us that rehabilitation begins from the very first moment a child is brought to safety. Her lecture should have been titled Child Hostage Care After Their Release, the Role of Schneider's Children's Medical Center. And I have to say one final word about this. 2 years ago, when I first heard Dr. Bona-Lev's presentation, I just, seldom do I get emotional hearing about Holocaust and things that are very hard to hear. I must say that when I heard Dr. Bona-Lev's presentation, I almost burst into tears. It's a pity she couldn't share with us the floor today, but I'm sure each and every one of us that read her chapter will relate to what I just said now. So I'd like to open the floor for the discussion, and I think we'll do the first round.
Maybe I can add something, because the event as of February 2024, where Efrat gave her lecture for 20 minutes or so, is online under the, you will find it on YouTube on the Western Galilee channel, I think. Yes.
Yeah, extremely powerful. So let's open the floor for discussion, and I think the first question is from Carol Obald to Daniela. Is there a list of these children that you discussed?
So thank you for the question. I don't have a list of the children. No, I just used some examples, and I also discussed the educators, not only the children.
Generally, there are lists of all the children in Cyprus. This was an organized time. The British held lists, the JDC had lists. I believe JDC Archive is the place to look for lists in archive. Maybe also Yad Vashem Archive has lists of detainees in Cyprus. This is a very well documented event, and there's even a whole book of the list of all documentary sources on Cyprus. There's a full book of just a guide to the sources. So sources exist. Question of whom to ask, I don't know, but this thing exists.
Okay, thank you. So another question from Karen Alberg for Nechama. Was the art on paper only or did it include sculptures and clay making as well?
The joint paintings and the drawings in general were on paper, but my master's research was about clay sculpting. So I'm definitely for it, but in the phased approach that I had with many different samples, I could only afford to do paper in this case.
Okay. Any other questions?
We have Martin raising a hand.
Please, Martin.
Yeah, my question is also to Daniela. So Daniela, excellent chapter. One thing that came to mind when I listened to you is that you said that basically the majority of these kids did really well after this, well, sort of haphazard way of dealing with Holocaust survivors. So didn't they develop problems in a much later stage of their life? You often see that also with war correspondents, that as soon as they leave the front lines, 20 years later, they get nightmares. I don't know, does that apply to your group?
Thank you, Martin. So first of all, maybe in such a short lecture, I didn't give the full picture, of course, but it's not that the children were not traumatized, they were. It was horrible for them. They cried at night. But what I meant, and this is what I'm writing about in the chapter, is that I'm talking about the psychological, let's say, tests that were done in Cyprus, and there they are mentioning that they almost didn't find like extraordinary, horrific behavior of the children. So they went through a kind of rehabilitation. But what you're asking is so important and interesting, because many of the children that I'm speaking about, they went on with their lives. They established families. Many of them came to Israel and stayed here after the war. And after years, when when historians actually came to listen to them, to take their testimonies, many of them said, you know what? I never talked about this period in Cyprus. And this is striking because also in many of the Holocaust testimonies, visual testimonies that we use a lot, the chapter about Cyprus is so little, and they almost never talk about it. They talk about what happened in the Holocaust, about before, but not about those maybe 2 years or so in Cyprus. And this is so interesting. I guess Boaz could add a lot about it.
I'd like to add
Please,
here,
Boaz.
if it's okay, Yaron. I think we don't. It is true, like Martin said. Usually, child survivors went to found the traumas at when they became senior citizens. This is when the dam broke, and I was in touch with an organization called the Children of the Holocaust, Yesh in Hebrew, Yaldei Shoah, and they had a real problem explaining why they need support. Now, where were you all the time? You had a regular lives, you were all successful, and it turns out it is really opening really late. I would also say that, of course, Daniela couldn't say everything about Cyprus. Was really hard. It was a terrible place. You are taking 58,000 people, putting them in closed camps, in tents and huts. The whole idea of the children's village was to take the children out of the adult environment so as to protect them from the experience of adults who are climbing the walls, like we say in Hebrew, that are getting crazy. Not all the children in Cyprus were in the children's village, only the organized groups and only those of the Zionist left and Zionist center. But Zionist right found themselves out of the village. I think we are, there is writing, I wrote about this in my work, and other people wrote about work in the camp with the children by the same caretakers who went with them from Europe, who came, like Chasya Belitska and others, and they were doing but the psychological work with the children as far as they knew, because they were not professionals. But mainly the central thing in the camp was giving children hope. And I think this is something very central to work with the child survivors in Zionist settings, that you had a dream for the children. You had something that you aim to. And this is a very potent exilier, a very potent medicine. That you have something to wish for. There is a future you can see. And by the way, the children's groups were taken out of Cyprus first, before the adults. The British agreed, and the Jewish agency and staff, and generally all the children were allowed to exit the camps first and go to Eretz Israel. But this was a major decision by all the people involved. It was obvious that this was really bad for the children. So I wanted also to talk about children's agency. Actually, this connects to a major issue, and in the Netherlands is very strong, the issue of the child's best interest. This is a major issue. I teach a course on child rehabilitation after the war and Holocaust. And the issue of child best interest is a major issue not only for Jewish children. It's a major issue in the post-war world, especially for unaccompanied minors or children where the legal status is not obvious. And the question, what is the child's best interest, is a major question. And by the way, in my courses, it's the major question I ask in the exam on how this issue of child's best. Netherlands is an example where I talked with someone today, a young girl here who looked at my library, where the court said the child's best interest is to stay with the families, the Dutch families who hid them. Even if there was a family relative, not a parent, but a relative around, even if a new Jewish school was opened, the policy was very strict. Children had to stay with the family, the foster family, until the end of high school or whatever, exactly what stage they were in. And I think the presentations we had today are very strong on showing all the variables and educational and moral issues of working with children after war or during war. Yes, it's not so much after. So we see it in the Hamas works, in what Martin was talking about, in what Daniela was talking about. We heard it from Verena in the opening. This whole issue of what do you really want to get done with the children, and what is moral and what is right. This is why it is, at least for me, so important to have this discussion between practitioners and historians, because this is not a new invention. These questions were there before and they are here now. And if we can make this discussion not only focused on the moment, but looking historically, we can really help people understand what is the price of deciding this way or that way. This is really obvious. So I think this is really strongly. I would just say that Verena is bombing the comments with really important information. First, the book is an open access book. If you didn't see it, it's open, and we made a big effort to have it open on the net. Just press the link or search for the Gruyter. If you don't find our link, search for the Gruyter site with the for the name of the book, and you will find it. You can download the whole book. You can see different chapters. So this is very important. We didn't put on the way in the chat the recording of the original post October 7th a panel where we had about the children of October 7th. And I think this is really
and I posted the link to our project Children.
Yeah, and we have our project Children for Holocaust and Genocide. This website is standing for 10 years already. It could be maybe modernized, but we are keeping it up to date mostly where we can. So it has a lot of materials and posts for children, children's testimonies, child rehabilitation. I see we have Nechama and someone else raising, and Adi Kantor. So Yaron, you give the...
Please, Nechama first and then Adi.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I saw that we missed a question by Carol about who wrote Art in the Holocaust. And I just thought I mentioned Elizabeth Lavick. I'll say the name of the book is A Meaning-Based Approach to Art Therapy. And I'll just say what's interesting about what the whole discussion here is that she interviewed also adult survivors nowadays that were children during the Holocaust to hear their perspective. So she also looked at that. She's not the only one. And I'll just say as a therapist that I think I think that's exactly why I really believe as deeply as Boaz is talking about and the others in this connection, because I think I keep holding this balance between not knowing. We don't know. We can be experts in trauma and experts in therapy and still appreciate and acknowledge that we don't know exactly the right timing for exactly the right intervention. We can short-term look at it, but then if we look at 80 years, it's a different story. And that's important to hold that. And at the same time, there are more, obviously, as time goes by, there's more written, and we can learn from what other people, also from research methodology. So yeah, holding both of those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Adi, please.
Yes, hi, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, allow me to thank you, first of all, for a fascinating talk. And it's great to see some old friends. So thank you again, and thank you for the book. As a researcher coming from the study of intergenerational transmission of trauma in the family discourse, I'm really interested. This is a question for all writers. Have you related to the aspect of the generational question? Because you relate to post-Holocaust the children, child survivors, and you relate also to the post-October 7th massacre. And if there is one thing we can say as researchers, is that there's a lot of study on the intergenerational discourse in the family after 45. I think we can learn a lot from what had happened. And maybe you talked about practitioners and historians working and collaborating together. We can really think about how to learn from, I think, challenges that are aspects that are challenging the family discourse after such a disaster, such a catastrophe, such a trauma, and maybe learn from it nowadays. If you talk about these two disasters, two catastrophes, October 7th on the one hand and the Holocaust on the other, I really think the generational aspect is vital, because there is already second generation to these children, and there's already third generation, even fourth. And they spoke and they speak today. And I think that we talked about the silence. I think it was Daniello talked about it, right? That the silence regarding what had happened in the camps in Cyprus, that there was never discussion about it in the family in the post-war years. And I think it's very important to draw implications on what does it mean after October 7th. There is not a second generation to the children, to the orphans of October 7th, right? But there will be a second generation, there will be a third generation. And I think this is the added value in this book, that we can really draw implications and consequences, you know, from past studies done on child survivors' families after the war, second generation, third generation, and so on. So I'm really interested to hear your opinion regarding the generational aspect in the book. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I will start. Yes, Boaz? So first of all, we didn't touch it. It's not, I think one of the issues is that there is a large body of research literature on this issue. Mm-hmm. We actually started from the point, what happens to when a child is in, how do you say this, in safety? Because in safety, it doesn't start, safety doesn't mean it's over. So this was the starting point. And the second thing is what I think AMCHA, they are doing this research also on the intergenerational. I know it here from Germany, Berlin, they are doing this research work. And I think there's one group of children, this was mentioned also here in the chat, these Windermere children, that this is the only group of children then that you have testimonies and reviews of the children, which are not yet open to the public, immediately in the post-war days, then some years later, and then in the 70s or 80s. Yes, but I think maybe Boaz of course wants to add something, but this intergenerational issue was not, I mean, you are absolutely right. But I think the issue of what happens, this what Yaron said about Efrat, what happens when a child arrives? Because there's not so much research, or let's say there are not so many chapters on this.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I would say that our children did not have so much intergenerational experience when they arrived after the war in children's homes or wherever. There wasn't much generations around to be with them. So actually we are talking a lot on the dynamics of children alone in the world. Mm-hmm. And the experience of working with these children. The modern UN definition is unaccompanied minors. Mm-hmm. But there are super unaccompanied minors, these children. And actually, I was much more interested, like Verena was saying, in what happens in the moment when the child is taken in by a
foster
home.
family?
I call it a home. I want to be very careful with my words. It's not an institution, because these are ad hoc organizations taking children together. They become what they call themselves. Children's homes is a very important part of their identity. And the dynamics within this village, home, children's kibbutz, whatever, they really influence the trajectory of the children later. Now, what goes from them? And there's a big difference between that and children who are with parents, survive with parents, which have no peer group. Like a friend here, his father, Belgian, two Belgian brothers and sisters, They were hidden. The parents were sent to Auschwitz. Parents came back. Parents took them from the foster families. They all got into the new apartment, and they sent the children to school when school year started, and this was all. But the children in children's homes, there was a whole dynamic of peer therapy and crying and love and all that was happening in the children's home. So I think this is we are not we are at least Verena and myself, I can say, and we are much less looking at second, third generations dynamic. We are looking at a moment when these children are children. Okay, I see that we already have others, Yaron.
Yeah,
But
please.
I would like, sorry, I would like to add something, because I think it's not unimportant, because I think everybody heard here of this idea or concept which was raised by Deborah Dwork on this issue of my war began in 1945. Yes, so when the war is over, when the hostilities are over, this is only the beginning of yes, what started for, or starts for the children. This was our idea, to bring this together in these workshops and in the book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, Adi, thank you very much for your question. I think that we've been speaking about what is in the best interest of the child on the moment they are taken in, and adding to this already gigantic problem is the fact that, or at least in the Dutch case, so children that went into hiding and survived the war were not taken that seriously for a long period of time. You know, they survived the war. So in the hierarchy of suffering, you needed to be in Sobibor or Auschwitz, and you needed to have been a survivor from that. Surviving the war by going into hiding was not necessarily seen as being, well, it was terrible, but you survived the war. So in the hierarchy of suffering, you were very low. What is also added to this, of course, is that, as Boaz already hinted at, for the Dutch government, there was only like one very important aspect. If the Jewish parents said something about what should happen to their kids should they not survive, that was leading. But this could also often mean that Jewish surviving children were put by an aunt or an uncle who were themselves traumatized from the war and then had to take care of a kid they didn't necessarily know. And that caused a huge array of problems. So it is often portrayed as if the Dutch government or other institutions in other countries were not taking into account, say, the Jewish element of these survivors, but they did try to act in the best interest of the kid. And if that meant keep them with the foster parent, that could be the ruling of court. Because what if the foster parent is already traumatized, him or herself? Can they really take care of someone who just came in with his own traumas? So this also means something for a generational transference of traumas. That what if your foster parent is already traumatized, taking in a traumatized kid? So just as an addition to your question, Adi.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Lecha, please.
Yeah, I'll just say I didn't write extensively about it, but I do feel a bit like I'm a bit of a bridge here because I didn't work with unaccompanied minors. I did work with parents. And in that sense, the right after the war, right during the war was live intergenerational trauma, because obviously the parents were transferring. It's a dialogue happening, right, in life. And I have to say, just to mention again, history happens so quickly and we forget all these aspects. And I think one forgotten aspect when it comes to Ukrainian refugees that I was working with in the workshops was that being in Berlin when the war broke out, a lot of Holocaust survivors came into the Jewish community, and not only Holocaust survivors, also other Ukrainians who were affected by the war in World War II. And so they brought with them, as they they arrived in Germany as refugees, they brought their intergenerational trauma, similarly to what happened in the 7th of October with Holocaust, children of Holocaust survivors and all of this. So it's a very huge topic, and I agree with you that it's essential and it's really, really important. And there's a lot of work to be done there. I mean, really a lot. And I'll just add one aspect because it occupied me a lot in my doctorate, which is, I didn't mention it, but I'm also a granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. And the therapist going through their own trauma is another issue that I think has also been happening a lot in Germany and in Europe, and definitely in Israel, which is the therapist dealing with their own trauma, with their own historical trauma, and how they take care of themselves in order to be able to help children and parents. So all of these very, very essential, important topics. There's a lot to be done.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions before we conclude? So if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to extend my further congratulations to Dr. Verena Buser and Dr. Boaz Cohen for their vision, for their dedication, devotion to bringing this outstanding piece of scholarship to life. May I take the opportunity to thank also Dr. Julia Brown, the chief editor of the Gruyter Brill, who conducted this project and brought it into life. So thank you very much, Julia. And to all of you distinguished speakers, Martijn, Nechama, Daniela, for your contributions, and to all of you who joined us, thank you very much. I'm sure this will be a groundbreaking book. We'll project on further dialogue, and especially start to focus on how to protect child rehabilitation in the future. I think this is the essence of this project, and we mustn't forget that. Please join us for future events. Boaz, do you know when our next event is?
No, we still didn't set it. We are a bit slow this year.
Okay.
The third
So-
year of the war, everything is slower.
But there will be an event in October with Martijn on child recovery.
But that's October is
11th of October. We keep you updated.
certainly.
Okay.
We will send
There she
invitations.
is.
We will do something
Yes.
with a
I hope I
very
didn't spoil
interesting
her.
and very prolific program of Ghetto Fighters House run by Martijn, and we'll do a joint cooperation also about children, etc. So but we hope before that to have one or two events too. So, okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Have a
Thank you,
great
Yaron,
evening.
for being our moderator.
Yeah, thank you, Yaron.
Yaron stepped in and did it really
Welcome.
well. Thank you, Yaron.
My pleasure.
You're welcome.
Goodbye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Take care,
evening.
y'all.
Bye.
Bye.